It's my privilege and honor now to introduce Congressman Doug Lamborn, who represents Colorado's 5th District. You have his biography. The fact that you're here today and you're interested in directed energy senses to me that the Congressman really needs no introduction. You know he's one of the leading lights and most forward thinkers on directed energy. He serves on the House Armed Services Committee. He is the Vice Chairman of the Strategic Forces Subcommittee, and he is the co-chair of Congress's Directed Energy Caucus. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Doug Lamborn.
Well, thanks so much for that nice introduction, Andy, and it's a real honor and it's humbling to be here with so many distinguished and knowledgeable people, people that I highly admire. So I'm glad I can play a role in this. There's nowhere I'd rather be at 8 o'clock in the morning. We have a busy day on the Hill with hearings and votes and everything else, but this is so important. I'm glad that I can be a part of this. You know, Americans have always led the world in creativity and innovation, and in using our creativity and innovation to defend our country and our allies, and directed energy is on the cutting edge of future technological progress. I fully support and appreciate what former Secretary Chuck Hagel and now Secretary Ash Carter are doing with calling for a much-needed third offset strategy. But I think our ability to fight and win wars creatively as Americans goes back even farther than the 70s and 80s with the revolution in precision-guided weapons, stealth, and ISR, or the nuclear strategy during the 50s. American creativity has been part of our DNA, our main and best strength since the very beginning. We used creative and innovative processes and weapons to defeat what was then the greatest empire on the face of the earth in our War of Independence. Throughout our nation's entire history, the American military has wielded our superior technology to fight tyranny and evil, as well as to defend the weak and oppressed. We have developed some weapons that have ended wars, and others that have prevented wars that never even began. As long as any of us in this room can remember, our technological edge has kept our enemies at bay and helped provide an edge and a backbone to our foreign policy of peace through strength. It has reassured allies and has caused our enemies to respect and fear us. However, as you know, if we don't change course, our superiority will slowly and surely be lost. Potential adversaries are developing new and sophisticated weapons that can threaten our ability to defend ourselves and our allies. The world is watching. Will we rise to the challenge and continue to be the most powerful military in the world or not? How do we maintain our technological superiority? What is the next big thing, the next breakthrough in defense capability? How we answer these questions will determine how safe and free we and our children and grandchildren are. Indeed, how safe the world is. People from the Hill, the department, and industry don't get together often enough for events like this, but when we do, it's amazing what can come through dialogue and collaboration. I truly hope that today we can help each other answer two basic questions. Why directed energy, and why now? Since 1960, we have spent more than $6 billion on directed energy. Yet until very recently, we've had too little to show for it. But we are at an exciting transition point where we can actually meet COCOM requirements in the near and midterm. But what can we do to push harder and ensure that these technologies make it past the tipping point? How do we transition to operational use and get warfighter buy-in? Several other questions are also very important. What is our strategy or our plan for how DE technology can help us tackle some of our hardest current as well as future challenges? How can we look not only where we are, but where we need to be? And how can we do better at what we're not always good at in the defense community, looking outside the box? Today at this summit, we collectively have many of these answers to these questions. We must continue to get the most talented and creative minds to work on the most innovative technology. We must rethink everything we're doing, both the what and the why, and even question basic assumptions. And finally, we need to avoid preaching to the choir. Most of us are here because we already are believers in directed energy. Those who are uninformed or skeptical are outside. Now, across the public and private sector, from the senior leaders to the warfighters, we still have a long way to go to raise awareness of how far directed energy has come, even in the past few years. That's why Congressman Jim Langevin and myself co-chair the Directed Energy Caucus. We want to educate members of Congress and their staffs about this technology, its benefits, and its amazing potential. And Congressman Langevin will be here later this morning to talk to you more about how you can better inform us in Congress on the maturity of these needed technologies and the potential advantages of future weapons. I don't need to tell you that Congress pays a lot of attention these days to anything that saves money, and rightly so, since the American people care about trying to get our debt under control. When it comes to defensive uses of directed energy weapons, Admiral Bill Gortney, who currently lives and works in my district in Colorado Springs, talks about how we need to, quote, get on the right side of the cost curve, unquote. He talks about that in a missile defense context, but it also applies more broadly, and it certainly applies to directed energy. This is one area where we clearly need to invest in order to save money in the long term. If it's truly possible for a beam of directed energy of sufficient intensity to destroy or degrade an incoming missile or shell for 50 cents worth of fuel, then we can flip the cost curve in our favor. With our ally Israel, we've recently seen that its incredible 86% success rate with Iron Dome has to be tempered with the fact that it's spending $100,000 per missile to take out a $500 Hamas homemade rocket. There is a limit to that type of trade-off. We've come a long way in the past handful of years when, for example, in 2007, the Defense Science Board noted, quote, a disappointing lack of progress in directed energy technology, as well as a marked decline in interest. So we've come a long way. Fortunately, we're not there, but we still have a long way to go for increasing investment to the levels where we have been in previous years. Now, we can fortunately still harvest the benefits of past research and development in directed energy. For example, the airborne laser, which was ultimately canceled, taught us a lot about directing a beam through the atmosphere, as well as other critical facets of laser technology. So I'm not personally dismayed when a technology of such immense potential encounters dead ends or other failures. Setbacks are an inevitable part of the research and development process and should not be an excuse to stop or limit research on projects with such immense potential. Supporting directed energy has strong bipartisan support in Congress, but there is some opposition. Now, to be fair, opposition may not be against directed energy per se. It's just that some people don't think it should be as prioritized as highly as the projects that they want to see go forward. Everyone's competing for that dollar. But every new defense technology was at one time unknown and unproven and had to compete with already tested and deployed programs of record. Bureaucratic inertia must be overcome. I was glad to get language into the NDAA calling for an assessment by the Undersecretary for Acquisition on the directed energy industrial base. Hopefully, this will give us some positive guidance going forward. And by the way, I also got language into the NDAA calling for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs to consider how directed energy can be better used by COCOMs, by the various COCOMs. One need we have with directed energy is to simply raise awareness within the military of how far it has come. Since I also co-chair the Space Power Caucus in Congress, I cannot help but also mention an additional important reason to advance DE systems to ensure that we can protect ourselves in space. Using satellites for communication and surveillance has been critical to our military tactics, operations, and strategy for quite some time now. Protecting these platforms from attacks is a priority that we can no longer ignore. Directed energy systems can play a vital role in deterring and defending our space systems from interference and attack, and they can potentially play a role in ballistic missile defense as well. Our potential adversaries are working furiously to exploit directed energy. We can't handcuff ourselves by false and shallow slogans such as not weaponizing space, quote unquote. It has been said that if an object in space has mass and can be directed, then it is a potential weapon. And if that's true, then space has already been weaponized. We can't let our adversaries steal a march on us. As we work to educate our colleagues on the Hill and broaden support for directed energy, as well as robust defense R&D in general, we are also working to make our acquisition system more agile, and are working to better tap into the strengths of the commercial sector where it makes strength to do so. All of these efforts will better allow defense to keep up with both rapid technological change and rising threats. Well, to conclude, I know you all have a great day ahead of you. I really look forward to seeing the impact of today's summit as we move forward. Remember, never underestimate American creativity or dedication to using that creativity for good. We must not only outspend our rivals, but outsmart them as well. Everyone here in this room has a vital role to play in defending our country. Thank you very much, and I'm happy now to spend some time taking your questions. Ask any questions you want, and if I can, I'll answer. So we'll just go from there until Andy tells us when to stop. Sir, right there.
Sidney Friedberg, Breaking Defense. To touch, sir, on your point about the scarce dollars, how do we protect, well, R&D and investment in general when we're facing the tight budgets and potentially the return of the BCA caps? And how do we carve out the funding for directed energy in particular, especially at a stage where it might actually turn from research projects to more expensive fielded programs?
Boy, that's a great question, and my staff told me to expect a question on sequestration. I didn't vote for it in the first place, by the way. And there is a lot of sentiment to keep the caps in place in general, because it's one way of imposing some spending discipline on Congress when we haven't been that disciplined in the past. However, I want to carve out an exception for defense. Defense is so critical when you read the Constitution, when you look at the world today, to our nation. It must have an exception. So let's do whatever it takes for defense, then everything else goes under the caps. So that's the message I'm taking to my colleagues, and actually it's been successful. On the Armed Services Committee, which is the biggest committee in Congress, we were successful in meeting the president's number, although we used OCO funding, Overseas Contingency Operations, as part of that, giving flexibility to the Pentagon to spend those dollars in a important way, realizing that it is somewhat of a budget gimmick, I have to admit, and not the ideal way to go, but it's better than not funding at all. So we met the president's number, met or exceeded it, and we just have to hold it through our through the work that the Senate does. Hopefully they'll pass an NDAA and a defense appropriations bill, both of which we've done in the House. And of course, we're conference on the NDAA right now. So we still have negotiations between the House and the Senate. And even if some parts of the budget, some of the big defense bills are not passed, I think we absolutely critically must have the defense appropriation bill as well as the authorization bill, so that people in the Pentagon do have the needed flexibility to move the money around and spend it exactly where it's got to go. And so directed energy, getting back to your question, directed energy research, there is money for that. Not enough, in my opinion, but there is money for going forward to keep it alive and even thriving, I think. I would always like to see more, but we do have to get both bills passed and on the president's desk. Where we go with sequestration after this year and the kinds of negotiations we will have with the Senate, and there's also, remember, we have to raise the debt limit ceiling. There are things like that we're going to be working on through the rest of the calendar year, past September 30th, I'm sure. So some of that remains to be seen, and your guess is as good as mine. Sir, right here.
Sir, James Drew with Flight Global. Could you give us a sense from your Directed Energy Caucus? You will know that the airborne laser system is now in the boneyard and is no longer flying. What interest is there from the caucus in getting a flying airborne testbed for laser weapon systems? Perhaps even a C-130 mounted type of aircraft?
I don't think that whole concept really has any legs going forward. I think electronic, not chemical laser is really where... Oh, a flying test bed. I'm just not sure that that's really where the interest or the money is going forward. But there are some great things tactically that are being done, like in the Navy with the Ponce project. That's a wonderful project. Each of the branches are working on different aspects, especially the Army and the Navy. But I don't see really much interest in what you just mentioned.
Hi, Andrea Shalal with Reuters. Congressman, I wanted to ask you about so you said the $6 billion had already been spent on this endeavor to date. What kind of lump sums do you think is still needed to get to that breakthrough point where these weapons can be, utilized across the military? And to what extent are you getting signals from the Pentagon that this will be part of their long-range kind of focus going forward? There's a big innovation initiative underway now and an assessment of what the long-range priorities are going to be. Do you think this will be included?
Well, I certainly couldn't put my finger on an exact amount that would be needed to go forward. Some of it remains to be seen. I mean, sometimes with new technology, you don't know how quickly you're going to meet the milestones that you want to meet. But I've seen some wonderful things happening down at the White Sands Missile Range space down in New Mexico, and some projects that are being worked on there. Some of our commercial partners in the defense industry are really investing their own money to make this whole field go forward. And that's a heartwarming thing to see. So I think it's a collaboration between the private sector and the military. But I certainly can't put my finger on an exact dollar amount going forward. And part of my job is when I see something with this potential, and not just future potential, but it's playing out right now today. I mentioned the Ponce. That's just one example. There's other things as well. Being able to shoot down UAVs. We have lasers that can do that right now. If you go down to White Sands, well, I don't know how much I should say, but there's just some great things happening that are visible and tangible that you can see today. And so I think part of the job of this summit is to get everyone together with the creativity and the ideas and the ingenuity, and that cross-breeding and fertilization hopefully takes us to the next level. So great question, but the future remains to be seen. Oh, the Pentagon has so many things to have to work on. Just the feeding of the budget just for the feeding and the pay of so many soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, that's a huge, there's so many priorities. And advanced systems, unfortunately, can take a back seat if sequestration continues to limit dollars. So that's one of my fears with sequestration is that we won't have money. That'll be one of the first things to go, as well as training and readiness. Because the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines have to be paid. Benefits that have been promised have to be provided. And there's no cutting, we can't skimp on that. So there's just so many priorities. Sometimes when I think my job's hard, I look at my friends in the military and the Pentagon and think their job's even harder. Thank you all for letting me be here today.